Howdy, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you for having us here. Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Manna. Unfortunately, there are too many people out there who have no clue as to what an appraisal is and how important it is in the home buying process. And so we're going to talk about certain aspects of the appraisal process, what appraisers are. We're going to have 5 different topics. What is an appraisal? Who is an appraiser? How does an appraiser determine value? What is the appraisal report all about? And what should I look for, and what do I do if I think the appraisal is not accurate? Everybody wants the dream of home ownership. And so the buyer wants to buy, the seller wants to sell, the lender wants to lend. Everybody wants the deal to go through. The appraiser sort of acts as the gatekeeper because we are not involved. We are independent, we are impartial, we are objective, and we want to do the best job for you and also for the lender, because the lender is putting out the vast majority of the money to purchase that property, and we don't want you to overpay for that property. We want you to pay a fair and equitable amount for that property. And sometimes the stars get in your eyes and you're like, I just have to have this home. We are both serving on the Board of Trustees of the Appraisal Foundation. And many of you would ask, what is the Appraisal Foundation? And the Appraisal Foundation is basically a standards-setting organization. We are recognized and authorized by Congress to set those standards for all of the appraisers across the entire country. And those appraisers are producing appraisals for not only real estate, but personal property and business valuation. But we're going to concentrate tonight on real property or real estate, the ability to value a home or a commercial piece of property, any type of property. So the first topic we're going to talk about is, what is an appraisal? And an appraisal is a very simple thing. It is one man or one woman's opinion as to what the value of a property is. Now, that's the easy part. The hard part is figuring out what that value is and all the steps that an individual must go through in order to develop that opinion of value. You make a decision, you go out into the public, you go out, you look for a home, and you ultimately make a decision as to which home you wish to buy. And then you start the negotiating process with the seller. And they want a certain amount of money, you want to pay a certain amount of money. Usually you want to pay a lot less than what they want to get for that property. And you negotiate and you finally arrive at a sale price. The appraiser then comes in, analyzes that sale price, analyzes all the conditions surrounding that sale price, analyzes the market, analyzes what we will call comparable sales, which are those property that they will compare to your subject property in order to determine if that is a reasonable and appropriate price to pay for that dwelling. Alternate valuations. There are computer-aided valuations called AVMs, or automated valuation models. Brokers will do price opinions when they're trying to price a home as to how much it should be put on the market for. And then also something called a CMA, or a comparable market analysis. Again, prepared by real estate agents to determine an asking price. Those are not appraisals. You may see them, they may show up, but they are not appraisals performed by a licensed or certified appraiser.
Impartiality.
Correct.
Which would, in my opinion, have a degree of honesty involved. Now, what if that impartiality gets corrupted? Now, granted, you said there are guidelines, there's rules, but I'm certain that there are cases when it has indeed been corrupted.
You're a very astute young man.
Yes.
It has been corrupted. Yes, it has. And that's why we have licensing and certification. And later on, we're going to talk about different segments of an appraisal. If you think an appraisal is not correct or it's inaccurate, the different alternatives that you have. But let's say this, every licensed and certified appraiser is licensed or certified by a particular state. And if an individual does something incorrectly or does something wrong, they are subject to loss of license. They are subject to all kinds of sanctions, fines, in some cases, jail time. So it's taken very, very, very seriously, and if something is done improperly, there are extreme ramifications and repercussions.
So how important is the comps to the appraisal?
How important are the comps to the appraisal?
Yeah, like, you know, you have a lot of new
Yes.
homes in
Comps,
historically poor areas.
for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, is short for comparable sales. And that's one of the approaches that we will talk about. But they're critical.
Right.
If you don't have a good comparable sales selection, if the appraiser does not do a good job in the selection of comparables, the likelihood of that appraisal being accurate goes way, way down. So it's critical that the appraiser be competent and understands the market, understands the various neighborhoods, and understands the characteristics of the property so that they can make an appropriate and proper comparable sales selection.
And what's the difference with an appraisal and the price of the property?
An appraisal is an opinion. The price is a fact. See, if I tell you, I got this property, I'm going to sell it for $100,000. That's the price. That's fact. Now, ABC Appraisal Company sends somebody out there and they're going to give their opinion. Okay? Sometimes they line up and sometimes they don't. The appraisal has to be supported by facts. In other words, comparable sales, recent comparable sales, to develop that opinion. An appraisal is an opinion of the value of that particular thing.
And I think, as Lawrence indicated, many times the appraised value and the purchase price are the same. Because if a willing buyer and a willing seller are both putting that negotiation together, and other willing buyers and other willing sellers are selling properties, then the comparable sales should justify the purchase price. And many, 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 many times it does. But there are those situations where, for one reason or another, maybe the seller is not fully informed, maybe the buyer is not fully informed. You know, if you don't know an area, you go into an area and it's like, oh, I'm going to buy the first house I find. Or the seller is under pressure to sell because they're getting behind in their payments, so they drop the price. I mean, in certain situations, an appraiser will come in and appraise the property for more than what it's selling for. And they will also appraise it for less than what it's selling for.
One thing I want you to understand, and this cannot be overemphasized, that the appraiser can't have a dog in the fight. He has to be objective, independent. He also has to be competent. Okay? So these are the concepts. The person that comes out that performs this service for you has to be independent, has to be impartial, and has to be objective, and he cannot be an advocate. Most of the regulatory agencies adopt USPAP in their state regulations and their laws. Even though the standards that are put out by the Appraisal Foundation, they don't carry the force of law. But once they are adopted by the various states, that's when the regulation and penalties and all the sanctions come in for violating the standards. When an appraiser comes out to inspect the property, he's not going to be like a home inspector because his concern is mainly in the value of the property. You have to get professionals that have particular expertise in the details of the plumbing inspector or electrical wire inspector or roof inspector, termite inspector. But appraisers are required to report what they see. Touching some of the pillars and the wood is real soft might be an indication that some kind of wood destroying insects might be involved. Now, am I a professional? No, but I have to point that out. Things that are readily observable, any competent appraiser will see. And that's the standard that we hold all appraisers to. You know, you can't ignore things. Things that the average homeowner might see. Well, it should show up in the appraisal report. How does an appraiser form an opinion of value? One thing you have to understand, you hear the term, well, appraisers set the value. Well, appraisers don't set the value. The market, and when I say the market, I'm thinking things that are happening in the market. Buyers and sellers make an offer on a property, and the seller accepts it, becomes a transaction, close the deal, that becomes a comparable for something else. That's what determines what the value, what's going on in the market. And the buyers really kind of determine it. Because say, for instance, you got a situation where there's not a whole bunch of properties out there available for you, but it's got a lot of buyers. Everybody trying to get it. What happens? Price goes up. Okay. But in a situation where you got a whole lot of property, and well, maybe banks not lending money at this time, or folks don't have money right now, and they still have to sell that property, what happens? Go down, okay.
That's the time to buy.
So my question is, what if an appraisal either appraises for less or more? Does that affect the purchase price?
Again, what are my two favorite words in all of appraising? It depends. And that's absolutely the truth. If the property is appraised for less than the sale price may be impacted, because if you can't get the financing, let's use Lawrence as example. It's selling for $100,000 and it only appraises for $90,000. And you're going to put 10% down. So you put $10,000 down, the bank would in theory give you a $90,000 mortgage. If it only appraises for $90,000, you can still put your $10,000 down, but the bank's only going to give you $80,000. So you would then either try and renegotiate and see if you can get a price adjustment, or they may say no deal and you walk away. If it appraises for more, I wouldn't recommend you go to the seller and say, hey, you sold it for me too cheaply and I'd like to pay you more money.
Exactly.
That probably won't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Down at the bottom of page 7, the red flags that might indicate a poorly done appraisal. And again, we've talked about some of those things. Having incomplete data, having inaccurate data. Your comparable sales selection is poor. Either they're vastly different properties, they're not from the same neighborhood, they occurred sometime in the past that's not acceptable. As Lawrence said, you know, the amount of time that a sale has occurred is not so important as to what's gone on in the marketplace since that sale. A sale 6 months ago in a stable market is a perfectly good comparable sale. A sale that took place 2 weeks ago with some major occurrence having taken place in between that time is no longer comparable. So again, what do we look for? Good comparable sales, accurate data, good measurements, good description, good everything done well. If you have inconsistency with adjustments, that's a problem. You know, appraisers must rely on the data that they get from the market. They can't just make statements, they can't make accusations, they can't say, oh, this is a good neighborhood or this is a bad neighborhood without proof. And that is critical. You can't omit things. And again, we talked about the bad appraisers out there. I've seen bad appraisers take photographs of the property and then take a photograph of the street and neglect to mention the burnt out building next door or the gas station on this side or whatever the case might be, because they're trying to accomplish something they shouldn't be accomplishing. So you've got to be accurate, you've got to be truthful, you can't omit things or put things in. If you think there's a problem with the appraisal, and you can't just again let your emotion take over, oh, they didn't appraise it for what I paid for it, I'm going to get that guy or that gal. You've got to be rational, you've got to be reasonable, you've got to read the report, and if you've done all that and you find a problem, then you certainly point it out to your lender and say, look, the appraiser missed the second bathroom, or they omitted the fact that this is a brand new heating system, or something like that. You've got to have facts to justify your concern. So read the report, look at it carefully, and then go to your lender and say, look, I think there's a problem because of A, B, C, or D. And be prepared to defend it. Again, it can't be an emotional thing. Again, go to your lender, discuss the problem, be prepared to defend it, and then if it's really a serious, serious problem where you've got all kinds of difficulties, you can go to the state. As we said, every state licenses the appraisers. And if you've got a bad problem, go to the state, file a complaint. That's how we weed out the bad apples.
A professional, a prepared appraisal is your best protection against overpaying. Think about that. You don't want to, as soon as you sign the contract, you're upside down. Most of you know what I mean when you say upside down? Okay. So your appraisal is your best protection because it's going to be supported by all the things that we've talked about earlier. The appraisal must meet national standards. Whether the value was what you expected or not, it's not really important as to whether or not how it was done and was it done accurately and professionally and without advocacy involved into the report. The appraisal should help you understand what information the appraiser used and how it was used to arrive at the opinions and the conclusions. This is a tool that you use in the process, and I might say not being biased toward appraisers, but believe me, there's nothing more important than understanding the value of what you're getting ready to buy. Most important aspect of the deal. You guys are gonna leave out of here armed with a little bit more tools.
Okay, I have two questions. One, is the price standardized across the market for appraising, for the cost of the appraisal? And two, the banks work with certain appraisals, or is it that or is it that they have like a pool that they can just pull from?
So 2 questions. Is the fee standardized? I'll answer that. No. I take the easy questions. It's going to vary depending on the property type. I'm sorry. It's going to vary depending on the property type. You know, a very large home is going to cost more to appraise. A complex home, a condominium is going to be different than a 2 to 4 family. So it's interdependent. And it varies by county, by state, by town, by city. So that's the answer. The simple answer, no, but for a whole variety of reasons. The second question about the pool from which they pull from,
Well,
Lawrence?
we had a recent law passed, the Dodd-Frank law, and what it did was separate the person who's going to, the lender, from the appraiser. And most of the times, lenders and real estate agents and everybody who has a vested interest in the transaction, or there's kind of like a wall in between them and the appraiser now. Most of the time, the lenders will use a appraisal management company. That management company says to Mr. Banker, okay, we don't want you to get involved with the appraiser, because you can easily see how that could be a conflict of interest. So you get somebody in there to handle all the issues that involve the appraisal. Okay. That way the appraiser don't have the issue of Mr. Back in the old days, I'm gonna tell you back to your question earlier, back in the old days when the guy could call you up and said, if you don't come in with this number, appraise this property the right way, you're not gonna get any more appraisal assignments from me. Okay. Putting his hand on the scale, making the numbers come in. Well, that don't happen as much now. Now, we have appraisal independence laws that keeps that kind of stuff from not happening. So, there are some cases in certain communities, smaller communities, where they may still have a panel that's at the bank. But the people who order and process the loan and the people who actually appraise the property, there has to be a firewall in between those two people, okay? Most of the time, when you said a pool, the banks used to have a panel of appraisals, and they would rotate them and stuff like that. That's not so much now, because of the problems that it had, where the officers who were ordering the appraisals were putting pressure on the appraisals because he was getting paid by commission. So the more loans he closed, the more money he made. Now, Joe Blow, honest appraisal, crazy Netterville goes out there and tells him what the property really is worth and he can't close, well, he won't call me no more. No, but that's part of the problem we had. But again, we got laws and stuff that separates that. There's a wall between the people who have a vested interest in the property and the transaction and the appraiser.
Well, you have been a terrific audience, excellent questions. Your depth of knowledge is very impressive. Thank you very much.